Welcome back to Icon Diary. This set of videos is a little bit different. I'll be doing things much the same, except that what I'm painting this time is not part of, strictly speaking, part of the project that I've been doing for the last few years and which we'll continue to do for the next couple of years. This icon is part of that project. This is an icon of Charles Harris. I'll talk more about Charles Harris later on, but to say at this time that I've been requested to paint a commission, to paint Charles Harris again for a member of the church who wants to give it as a gift to another leader. Charles Harris was a leader in the Aboriginal community, and because he was of an Aboriginal family, I got permission from his family to paint icons of him. There are cultural issues within Aboriginal communities that made it sensitive for me to do that. So I'm very grateful to the Harris family for their permission. Another difference in this icon is that I'm not using a panel that is made of pine and braced. Instead, I'm using a panel which I have made up from marine ply, and the frame is a thin strip of pine that has been glued on. Everything else is exactly the same, but because it is marine ply, it's very stable. It is not going to warp, and so it's going to be a very, I hope, long-lasting icon. The other thing that is kind of different but kind of the same is that this icon and this icon will be painted only in ochre, and ochres from the Moanjum community in the Kimberley. So it comes from an Aboriginal art community and comes from the land of that community, of which clearly Charles Harris had connections. They are beautiful ochres, and I will talk more about them as I start to paint. But the first task is, again, even though I have sketched and painted this icon, I will do a sketch all over again on my pad before I start painting on my panel. See you as I start to sketch. One of the things I've realised as I've been painting this icon at this time is that coincidentally it is NAIDOC week in Australia. For overseas viewers, NAIDOC week is a special week in the Australian calendar in which we remember and celebrate Aboriginal culture. I live and work and play in the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As I paint this Aboriginal man, I am preparing, as I warned you, that I would sketch first. I won't do a lot of explaining about what I'm doing, just to say that this is 4 times, all the painting that I'm doing is 4 times normal speed, so that we're only here for a quarter of the time. The other thing that didn't say before is that for a change, I'm doing this in one episode, so it's a long episode. So feel free to go and get a cup of tea anytime. I'm drawing at this stage with a very hard lead, about a 2H, and then we'll go to a 4B to darken it up. And this is a sketch which I found myself not paying too much attention to during the painting. I relied more on a photo that you'll see coming up in a little while, but I also had close at hand the original painting that I had done, particularly to get the highlights right. Checking distances, getting facial features correct in their dimensions. Face divided into 4, nose length. Nose length is also the distance between the eyes. And I had a few difficulties with this getting once I started putting it onto the panel, but by and large it was reasonably straightforward and quite happy with the result. But I'll just stop there for a moment as I come on to talk a little bit more. Well, for the next stage we'll paint, sketch with yellow ochre and water. We'll sketch the image onto our panel. I'm not going to have this as the model sitting up on the easel. It needs to be away somewhere safe, but I'll have it so that it's within sight so I can see it. Instead I have this original, really poor image from a photo that I was sent, and that will be a helpful reference point because it'll get the original sweet look on Charles Harris' face. So our next task is to sketch with yellow ochre the image of Charles Harris onto our panel. Well, I'd like to read to you a piece by William Emerson, who writes this little biography of Charles Harris. Charles Enoch Edward Harris, 1931 to 1993, was a cane cutter, a railway worker, Assembly of God evangelist, Methodist and Uniting Church minister, and the founding president of the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress from 1985 to his retirement due to ill health in 1989. He was born on the 8th of July 1931 into a Christian family in Ingham, North Queensland. His father was of Torres Strait Island and Spanish descent. His mother was of Aboriginal and Malay ancestry. The Harris family belonged to a Pentecostal Christian tradition. After a self-confessed wild youth and various labouring jobs, Harris joined the Assemblies of God and became involved in youth work at Ayr. He later trained at the Commonwealth Bible College, Assemblies of God, from 1957 to 1959, and then took on several non-stipendiary pastorates with the Assemblies of God. In 1966, Harris joined the Ingham Methodist Church and came under the influence of the Reverend Edward Smith, the superintendent of the Ingham Circuit. A year later, he was appointed a circuit assistant. The following year, Harris followed Smith to the Hermit Park Circuit in Townsville, where he was appointed pastor to the newly established Mission to Aborigines and Islanders in North Queensland. Under testing circumstances, Harris persisted for 5 years in this evangelical and caring ministry, visiting prisons, conducting missions, and caring for Townsville's displaced and homeless bridge people. Persuaded by Pastor Don Brady, the boxing parson, Harris became a staff member of Central Methodist Mission in Brisbane in 1973, under the superintendency of the Reverend George Nash. Brady introduced Harris to the world of Aboriginal struggle for justice and demonstrated to him how the gospel was addressed to every part of life. Harris assumed pastoral oversight of the predominantly Aboriginal and Islander congregation of the Paddington Methodist Church in Brisbane, where he gave leadership to the urban Aboriginal mission in Brisbane and helped to establish a support network for Christian Aboriginal and Islander groups throughout the state. In this period, the sharpest focus of his ministry was to alcoholics and troubled people who frequented Musgrave Park in Brisbane. Harris' obvious gifts of evangelism and leadership singled him out for ordination, and arrangements were made for him to study at Nungalinga College in Darwin. He was ordained on the 27th of November 1980 in Brisbane, the first Aboriginal and Islander minister to be ordained by the Uniting Church in Queensland. Of the many achievements in Harris' ministry, two stand out above the rest. The first is the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress. It was his vision and energy that would eventually lead to the formation of the Congress at Elcho Island in August 1983. The second is the March for Justice, Freedom and Hope. It was Harris who was the driving force behind the idea of the march held on the streets of Sydney on the 26th of January 1988. For overseas visitors, 26th of January is Australia Day. For Aborigines, that is an invasion day. It was the largest gathering of Indigenous people ever in Australia and arguably the centrepiece of Aboriginal protest during the bicentennial year. In both the forming of Congress and the planning of the march, Harris was the instigator, visionary, primary advocate, spokesperson, troubleshooter and figurehead. It was he who worked incessantly, travelled around the country, building bridges between Aboriginal groups, between them and the white community, and between church people and the non-church people. The march propelled Charles Harris into the national and international spotlight and promoted the fledgling Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress as one of the leading Aboriginal and Islander organisations in the country. Throughout the planning of the march, Harris grew as a national leader and a symbol of what Aboriginal and Islander people could do together in their common struggle. Sir Ronald Wilson remarked on the occasion of Harris's retirement, "The emergence of the Congress as perhaps the leading Aboriginal organisation in the country, the growing maturity of its leadership and its finest hour, the bicentenary March for Freedom, Justice and Hope, will stand as lasting monuments to Charles' vision as President, his determination and keen sense of justice." Towards the end of Harris's life, he became progressively more radical, seizing every opportunity to speak out against injustice and the church's and government's role in perpetuating injustice. His prayer in Hyde Park on the day of the march was typical of the gentle yet determined man who struggled to free his people. His prayer: God of the Dreamtime, you who are with us during those 40,000 years or more before 1788. You were the one who gave us our law and our ceremonies. You were the one who gave us our dreaming, our stories and our sacred sites. The one who gave us this land. You were with us then. You are with us now. You marched with us today. You will be with us during this week of activities here in Sydney. You abhor the abomination which is taking place only 2 kilometres from here. You were with us during the past 200 years of the onslaught and sophisticated terrorism and apartheid, and you have helped us to survive through it all. God of the Dreamtime, avenge your people of their blood cries God of the Dreamtime, avenge your people, for their blood cries out to you from the very grave of the land which you gave us. Avenge your people. Show to the world the evil and the wickedness of this people who came, lied, cheated, raped, stole and murdered. Expose them to the world. Break down the mountains of injustice which surround us. Smash down the walls which imprison us. Lift us from the despair of hopelessness. Bring us justice. Bring us freedom. Bring us hope. Charles Harris died on the 7th of May, 1993. The background music that you are hearing is the didgeridoo, an Aboriginal instrument which is played by many now in Australia, both particularly Aboriginal people, but also white people are embracing it as well. It is an instrument of the north of Australia, and but it has been embraced throughout Australia. So I thought it appropriate that, as Charles is a northerner and certainly spent a lot of his study time and his later life in Darwin, this instrument is suitable for playing as I paint this icon. This particular method of painting a face in egg tempera, that is, egg tempera is egg yolk. I've mixed 1 pint egg yolk with 1 part white wine. Can be water, but I use white wine. It keeps in the fridge very well for months. It's mixed with dry pigment. The dry pigments, as I've said on this occasion, is ochres from the Mellingham art community in the Kimberley region in the northwest part of Australia. Now, this particular style of painting a face is in Russian called a Sankhya method, because the dark shadow, the darkest tones are painted on first over the whole lot of the face. I had put in very dark lines so I could see eyes, nose and things like that, but it then covers it all over, and then other flesh tone is mixed. In this case I used yellow ochre, a little bit of red ochre, and then progressively added white ochre. I have to say the white ochre behaves very differently from the titanium white which I usually use, so it was interesting to paint with this mixture of pigments this time. It is significant that whether painting a white face or a black face or a brown face, certainly of course with the darker skin tones, there is more dark than in a Caucasian face. But interestingly, very, very often the darkest parts of a Caucasian face in the shadows will have just as dark a pigment as a dark face. And all our skin, whether black or white or whatever other hue it might be, is shiny. And so the light catches on our skin, and so I'm using pretty much the same lightest tones on the brightest highlights of this face as on a Caucasian face. Going back to the story of Charles Harris, it was at the National Assembly of the Uniting Church in 1985 in Sydney that the Uniting Church received and recognised as part of its life the Aboriginal and Islander, the Uniting Aboriginal and Islander Christian Congress. And I was a member of that assembly. It was the first time I was a member of assembly. And in those days I lived in the Western District of Victoria, and on the land of the Wurundjeri, not the Wurundjeri, of the Gunditjmara people, and was involved with their cooperative in Warrnambool. But as chairperson of the presbytery of that area, I was able to go to that assembly. And one of the great highlights of that assembly in Sydney was the church formally recognising the Congress. And Charles Harris, I remember, was there, and other members of the Congress. And that was a great celebration in the church, and I remember it fondly and well. My father was also a member of that assembly shortly before his retirement. Well, now for the hair, I'm just blocking in the black at this stage. It's as I've said before, it's a lovely blue black. So I'm just painting with red ochre, just putting in the crease around the top eyelid and down the side of the nose, just a few little bits, and in the corners of the eyes. It's interesting, you don't see it, but I do this I do this on all faces. It's very common art portraiture that you see from the Renaissance period too, particularly European portraiture. Let's take off some of that hair. It's not really a haircut, but it did make a smudge. Little adjustments. Well, I have to say this is proving challenging on a number of fronts. It's hard enough to make an image of a person so that it has some sort of resemblance to that person. Trying to catch that smile in Charles' face, and certainly I think I've got that okay. The other challenge is that this is the second time I have painted this image, and it's not looking much like the last one that I did. However, that aside, the other challenge is that by and large I'm using pigments that behave slightly differently from the ones that I usually use. As I've said before, I'm painting with the Moanjum ochres because they are from an Aboriginal community. They're beautiful ochres, but they just behave slightly differently. For example, the white, lovely as it is and as stands out very beautifully and helps to lighten up pigments very effectively, it does behave differently from titanium white, which is what I usually use. The black is also quite different. It's a blue black, unlike the Mars black, which is, what would you say, black. And we will see, particularly when we start working on the suit, that this black behaves in a very blue way and very beautifully. It can also act in a green way when yellow is added. We do need to change some of the shape in that shoulder. It's wrong. However, I think I need to stop for today and start up again another time when I'm fresh. So here I am again the next day, sandpapered off the offending shoulder, and with a pencil just trying to get that proportion working correctly, and then with black paint get the outlines in. This is just the third day of painting. I did the sketches on the first day. I did the face on the second day. This is the third day. We're just putting him on in his suit. There might be a question from some as to why I haven't done some things which would be much more obviously Aboriginal, like including Aboriginal flag, or putting in dot decorations, which are very typical of Aboriginal art. Why am I putting Charles Harris in a suit and tie? Well, the reason for not using characteristics of Aboriginal art is that I don't have their permission to do that. That is their culture, and I would think, regarded as arrogant to claim that to myself. So I don't. Why dress him in a suit? Well, it's because that's the photo that I got, and it is a formal photo. It is the way Charles Harris chose to be depicted in that photo. So for me to change what he chose, again, I think I would regard as arrogant. Just for a moment I thought of changing the tie, perhaps using different colours, but no, again I stayed with the colours that were in his tie. I have used all the 6 pigments that I have from Aboriginal. The obvious ones are of course black and white, also the brown, which was the sankia, the base colour of the face, and the yellow, which became the base for the highlights. Also in a little while you'll see me splash on the background, which is yellow ochre and the white ochre. But then also on the border you'll see and on the inscription I paint with this beautiful maroon, deep maroon, purpley pigment. It's just gorgeous. And the red, there's a little bit of red in the flesh, but also in the lines on the face. So all the pigments were used.
Thank you. Thank you.